Emma, breakfast is ready. Margaret Wilson looked up at the staircase as she placed warm English muffins on the kitchen counter. She could hear her 8-year-old daughter's footsteps coming down from the second floor. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting a soft light in the kitchen. Coming. Emma's reply was followed by the sound of small feet hurrying down the stairs. Margaret couldn't help but smile. It had been 2 years since she lost her husband, James. Though the days of raising Emma alone hadn't been easy, her daughter's presence had been her emotional anchor. "Mom, are you working at the hospital today?" Emma sat up straight in her chair and reached for the cranberry juice. Her straight black hair gleamed in the morning light. She gazed at Margaret with large eyes that resembled her father's. "Yes, night shift. Grandma will pick you up." The moment those words left her lips, Margaret felt a twinge of hesitation. Her mother-in-law, Betty Harrison, appeared kind and caring on the surface. However, sometimes Margaret sensed something unsettling behind that smile. This feeling had grown stronger since James's death. Margaret unconsciously glanced at the family photograph on the kitchen shelf. It captured the three of them smiling at the end of summer 2 years ago. Emma laughing in James's arms. Margaret herself smiling happily beside them. Everything changed less than a week after that day. The sudden illness. The emergency hospital admission. And death 3 days later. The doctors had diagnosed it as unexplained acute heart failure, but something didn't sit right with Margaret, who had 10 years of experience as a nurse. However, faced with her grief-stricken mother-in-law, she couldn't voice her doubts. "Mom, are you looking at the photo?" Emma's voice brought Margaret back to reality, and she hurriedly checked the clock. "Oh my, look at the time. We need to hurry." Just as they were heading to the door, the phone rang. The display showed Betty. Margaret frowned at the earlier-than-usual call. "Hello, Betty." "Margaret," came the syrupy voice. "I'm feeling under the weather. I think I'll be bedridden today. Are you all right? Should I call a doctor?" "No, it's not that serious. But, could you perhaps come check on me with Emma?" There was an urgency in her voice that Margaret had never heard before. And simultaneously, something else, another emotion she couldn't quite place. Margaret found herself momentarily speechless. "I want to see my granddaughter," Betty continued. "It's been a while since I last saw her." Outside, the cold spring wind rustled through the street trees. Margaret looked at Emma, who had already put on her shoes and was ready to leave. "All right. I'll come by after dropping Emma off at school." "Thank you, Margaret," Betty's voice brightened. "You're such a good daughter-in-law." Those words lingered in Margaret's ears even after hanging up. Looking at her reflection in the hallway mirror, she felt an unsettling sense that something was about to change. In the car, Margaret noticed her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. In the passenger seat, Emma silently stared out the window. Her usually energetic daughter was oddly quiet today. "Emma, are you okay?" "Yes." Her response lacked energy. As they drove through the quiet suburban streets of Cambridge, the sky grew increasingly gray. Soon, Betty's old Victorian mansion came into view. The imposing structure with its white walls and green trim stood out even in this prestigious neighborhood. The gate was half open. The well-maintained garden trees cast eerie shadows as they swayed in the wind. Margaret parked the car and turned off the engine. At that moment, Emma shivered slightly. "Are you cold?" "No, something just feels strange." Margaret hesitated at her daughter's words but didn't pursue it further. They stood before the heavy front door. After knocking, they heard an immediate response. "It's open, come in." A hoarse voice came from within. When Margaret opened the door, she was hit by the smell of old furniture and a faint chemical odor. The house, usually kept immaculately clean, felt oddly oppressive today. "I'm upstairs." Guided by Betty's voice, Margaret and Emma climbed the stairs. Emma's small hand gripped Margaret's tightly. Each step made the old wood creak beneath them. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. Betty lay in bed, her face paler than usual. Yet her eyes had a strange gleam. "Margaret, Emma, thank you for coming." Betty slowly sat up. Her silk pajamas caught the dim light. Several medicine bottles were lined up on the bedside table. "How are you feeling?" Margaret observed her mother-in-law with a nurse's professional eye. "I have a slight fever." "But I'm so happy you both came," Betty smiled. There was something different about her expression today. "Emma, I baked my special cookies. They're in the kitchen." Emma looked up at her mother. Margaret gave a small nod and gently pushed her daughter's back. "It's okay. Go ahead." Emma left the room reluctantly. They could hear her footsteps descending the stairs. Margaret sat down in the chair beside her mother-in-law. "Shall I make some tea?" "Yes, please. The tea set is ready in the parlor." Just as Margaret was about to stand, they heard a noise from downstairs. "Emma? Are you all right?" There was no response. Margaret hesitated for a moment, then gave her mother-in-law a slight bow before leaving the room. As she descended the stairs, she felt a chill run down her spine. The parlor was located in a secluded area on the first floor. The tea set was indeed prepared there. But Emma was nowhere to be seen. No sounds came from the kitchen. "Emma?" Feeling increasingly anxious, Margaret headed to the kitchen. There she found Emma standing frozen in a corner. "What's wrong?" Emma turned around. Her face was pale, and her whole body was trembling slightly. "Mom." Her daughter's voice was barely a whisper. Emma ran to her mother and gripped her hand tightly. "Mom, we need to get out of here right now." Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. Just then, they heard a sound from the stairs. Turning around, they saw Betty standing at the top. Still in her pajamas, she was watching them with a slow smile. "Oh, Emma. Did you enjoy the cookies?" Her voice was as gentle as ever. But Emma's trembling grew stronger. Margaret felt her daughter's small body press against her arm. "Betty, I think we should leave for today. Emma's not feeling well either." "Oh?" Betty's voice sharpened for just a moment. "But the tea is ready. Just for a little while." "I'm sorry," Margaret tried to keep her voice natural while squeezing Emma's hand. We'll visit another time. They headed for the front door. Margaret could feel Betty's gaze on her back as she tried not to appear rushed. Yet when she grabbed the doorknob, her hand was trembling slightly. Drive safely. Margaret nodded without turning back at Betty's voice. Outside, the cold spring wind enveloped them. They quickly got into the car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, Margaret could see Betty watching them from the second-floor window. The moment the car started moving, Emma finally let out a deep breath. Her small body was still trembling. Margaret gripped the steering wheel tightly as she drove away as quickly as she could while maintaining a natural speed. No one spoke until the house disappeared from view. Back in their living room, Emma sat silently in a corner of the sofa, as if trying to make herself smaller. Margaret placed a hot cocoa in front of her daughter and gently put a hand on her shoulder. "Can you tell me? What did you see?" Emma held the mug with both hands, and silence stretched between them. Outside the window, the evening sky was gradually turning purple. In the kitchen, Emma began in a trembling voice. "Grandma had white powder near the tea set." Margaret caught her breath. "That's not all," Emma continued. "Grandma's eyes, they were the same as when Dad died." "The same as when Dad died?" Emma nodded slightly. "That time too, it was after we had tea at Grandma's house. Dad started feeling sick." The memories came flooding back. The end of summer 2 years ago. James's sudden illness. 3 days in the hospital. And the unexpected death. At the time, she had been too overwhelmed with grief to carefully consider the circumstances. Margaret stood up and went to her study. From the drawer where she kept her nursing records, she pulled out a copy of James's medical records. As a nurse, she had developed the habit of keeping all records. She spread out the records and reviewed the progression of symptoms. Sudden vomiting, dizziness, confusion. Then death from acute heart failure. Something felt off. Drawing from her 10 years of nursing experience, something was starting to connect in her mind. She took out her smartphone and called her colleague, Dr. Sarah Cohen, who worked in the emergency department at the local hospital. "Sarah, I'm sorry for the sudden call." She explained James's symptoms while looking at the records. "Does this remind you of anything?" On the other end of the line, Sarah was silent for a moment. "Margaret, I'll be honest," Sarah's voice was lower and more careful than usual. "This looks similar to digitalis poisoning." "Digitalis?" Margaret gasped. "A cardiac glycoside used to treat heart conditions. Overdose can be fatal." "Yes. Especially the progression of vomiting and consciousness disturbance is characteristic." "But, why now?" Margaret was connecting Betty's behavior today, Emma's fear, and the memories from 2 years ago. With trembling hands, she ended the call. When she returned to the living room, Emma was sitting on the sofa with her knees pulled up to her chest. Night was falling, and the shadows in the room were growing deeper. "Mom," Emma called in a small voice. "I remember Dad well." Margaret sat next to her daughter. Emma continued. "Right after Dad had tea at Grandma's house, he started feeling sick. But Grandma wasn't panicked at all. Rather." Emma paused as if searching for words. She seemed happy. Margaret felt her spine freeze at those words. In her memory, Betty's unnatural behavior came flooding back. Her abnormal calmness at the hospital. Her unusually quick recovery after James's death. And her obsessive attitude about managing the inheritance. The phone rang. The display showed Betty. Margaret ignored the call and dialed a different number instead. "Hello, is this the Cambridge Police Department?" Her voice was surprisingly calm, even to herself. "My husband died suddenly 2 years ago. And today, my mother-in-law." As she continued her explanation, Margaret hugged Emma. She could still feel her daughter's small body trembling slightly. Outside the window, stars were beginning to twinkle in the spring night sky. After finishing her conversation with the police, Margaret called Sarah again. They would need expert medical testimony. And possibly a re-examination of James's body. While stroking her daughter's hair, Margaret said, "Your courage saved us." Emma remained silent, just holding on to Margaret tightly. That night, they decided to sleep in the same bed. In the darkness, Margaret listened to her daughter's breathing while steeling herself for the long battle ahead. The police had already begun moving. Investigation into Betty's past. Re-examination of James's cause of death. And above all, ensuring Emma's safety. Unread messages from Betty kept arriving on her cell phone. The obsession felt abnormal. Margaret turned off the phone and held Emma closer. Protect her beloved daughter. Margaret held this firm resolve in her heart in the darkness. In the police station interrogation room, Margaret stood before the one-way mirror, watching Betty Harrison being questioned on the other side. Dr. Sarah Cohen stood beside her, taking notes on her expert observations. 3 days ago, the house search had uncovered decisive evidence. Multiple pharmaceutical substances found in a kitchen cabinet. Digitalis powder. And most shockingly, detailed records dating back to the time of James's death. "It's like a nursing record," Sarah whispered. "Everything from dosage to progress monitoring is meticulously documented." Margaret nodded silently. Given Betty's perfectionist nature, it made sense. Yet she still shuddered at the fact that this perfectionism had been directed toward taking her son's life. In the interrogation room, Betty's demeanor was gradually changing. The dignified appearance she had maintained during her arrest had faded, and now she sat in the chair with a disturbed expression. "I was only trying to save my son." Her voice echoed through the speakers. "I had to protect him from her. Margaret was too perfect. Not suitable for my son." The interrogator continued questioning in a calm voice. "And you planned the same for your granddaughter and her mother?" "Yes," Betty's voice suddenly turned cold. "They took everything from my son. The inheritance, the memories, everything." Margaret caught her breath. Sarah placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "But I had a plan," Betty continued, her eyes taking on an unusual gleam. "First, to save my son. Free him from that woman. And then." Betty suddenly stood up and walked toward the one-way mirror, as if sensing Margaret's presence. "You destroyed my perfect family. So I." As the interrogator moved to restrain her, Betty collapsed into the chair. Then, an unexpected confession began. Betty's childhood in a wealthy Boston family in the 1960s. Psychological abuse from her stepmother. Days of being pushed to perfection. A political marriage at 19. And the birth of her only son, her sole salvation. James was my everything, Betty's voice trembled. My reason for living. My life itself. But as her son grew, Betty's desire for control became twisted. College, career, and marriage, every event took her son further from his mother's grasp. Margaret was too perfect, Betty repeated. Kind, intelligent, caring. But I couldn't stand it. My son wasn't worthy of such a perfect woman. She would change my son. Sarah whispered, shows characteristics of grandiose personality disorder. Betty's confession continued. Her abnormal attachment to her son. Her obsession with the perfect family image. And her plan to reclaim everything. I started with small amounts. Mixed in the tea. Betty's voice became eerily calm. Gradually increased the dose while monitoring the effects. Playing nurse. But I was more perfect. There was a moment when the air in the interrogation room seemed to freeze. And the plan worked. But Betty suddenly broke down crying. My son died. But that too was destiny. We'll be together forever. Margaret closed her eyes. Memories raced through her mind like a film reel. Meeting James. Betty's subtle expression at the wedding. And her unusual calmness at her son's death. Everything connected. A detective entered the room. This is sufficient. Charges will be murder and attempted murder. Life imprisonment is inevitable. Margaret nodded silently. Outside the window, the rain had stopped, and sunlight was beginning to break through. Motherhood sometimes breeds madness, Sarah said quietly. No, Margaret answered. That wasn't motherhood. It was obsession. In the interrogation room, Betty sat with her head bowed deeply. Her life's pursuit of perfection was ironically reaching its most twisted conclusion. Looking back, Emma was sleeping on a sofa in the police station. Margaret sat beside her daughter and held her small hand. Now, she strongly felt that this pure bond between mother and daughter was the true form of family. 1 year later, Margaret and Emma had finished moving into their new house. In a quiet residential area of Medford, slightly removed from Cambridge's bustle. A maple tree beginning to show its autumn colors stood in the garden, and mornings brought the awakening songs of small birds. Mom, can I hang this photo in my new room? Emma pulled a photograph from a cardboard box. It was from 3 years ago, a summer trip to Cape Cod. The three of them on the beach, Emma laughing innocently while her parents smiled together beside her. Of course, Margaret gently stroked her daughter's hair. I'm sure Dad would be happy to see our new home. Emma was now 9 years old. Over the past year, she had developed both the delicacy and strength of a young girl. She maintained excellent grades at school and made several new friends. Most importantly, she had begun to heal from those events, little by little. The school transfer was definitely the right choice. Dr. Sarah Cohen said, drinking coffee in a decked chair during a weekend visit. Emma's expression is completely different. Indeed, After Betty was sentenced to life imprisonment, her daughter's expression gradually regained its brightness. In the new environment, she was able to slowly distance herself from the heavy memories. The counselor praised Emma's resilience, Margaret answered, watching her daughter playing in the distance. Children truly have remarkable strength. The clear autumn blue spread across the sky, and a pleasant breeze stirred the garden trees. What about the letters from Betty? Sarah asked quietly. Yes, they still come every month, Margaret answered with a sigh. But I've decided not to reply anymore. The letters from prison were initially filled with intense resentment. However, as time passed, their tone changed. Through regular sessions with a psychiatrist, Betty seemed to slowly begin understanding the gravity of her actions. In her most recent letter, she had written, "In my excessive love for my son, I twisted love itself. In pursuing perfection, I destroyed what was most precious. I know I cannot be forgiven. I only pray that you and Emma find true happiness." Perhaps it's the beginning of her own form of atonement, Sarah said. Margaret nodded silently. Hatred and anger no longer dominated her heart. They had transformed into something deeper, beyond feelings of revenge or punishment. "Hey, Mom," Emma came running from the garden. "Let's visit Dad's grave tomorrow." Their monthly visit to James's grave had become not a place to recall painful memories, but a place to confirm their bond with a cherished loved one. "Yes, let's bring pictures of our new house." Emma nodded happily. "I have so many things to tell Dad. About my new school, my friends." As evening approached, long shadows began stretching across the garden. After Sarah left, Margaret gazed at the view from the kitchen window while preparing dinner. From their new house, they could see the Charles River. The surface of the water gleamed golden in the setting sun. There, a new story was beginning for the mother and daughter who continued walking forward while accepting the weight of their past memories. That night, watching Emma's sleeping face, Margaret smiled quietly. Tomorrow she had the night shift at the hospital. The ordinary daily routine now felt more precious than ever. By the bedside sat a new family photo. A composition of pictures of Margaret and Emma, alongside James's photo. Past, present, and hope for the future were all contained within that single frame. Outside, the autumn wind gently rustled the trees, and the full moon's light tenderly embraced their new home. It was as if blessing the beginning of their new life.